As for the rest, even if they had already been bestowed the title of prince, they were all nothing to be afraid of, let alone those who had not yet been bestowed the title of prince. In other words, the current Qiyuan was still fiercely fighting, but in fact, Prince Jin's family was already the dominant force. If he tried to usurp the throne at this time, the chances of success were not too high. However, Li Hongyuan obviously did not have this plan for the time being. After all, success was success, but in the end the chaos would also be very big. There would be too much trouble and he would have less time to accompany his wife. It was completely not worth it. Therefore, the power of those brothers would continue to nibble away. Not to mention these things, if one thought about it carefully, the Luo family actually had nothing to do with Duke Ding's Fu. After all, Sun Yijia and Sun Yilin had already been adopted, and the genealogy had already been changed. Not to mention that Sun Yijia did not even want to pay attention to those people. Even if Duke Ding's Fu wanted to reach out to the Luo family and show concern for Luo Jinghua, they were essentially unqualified. There were also Luo Peishan's colleagues, subordinates, and old friends who had already secretly prepared congratulatory gifts. Their views were the same. If Luo Peishan was not confident, he probably would not have let his grandchildren take part in the competition. Who knew how many people were envious of Luo Peishan? How could he, Luo Peishan, be so good at giving birth and raising children? The Luo family was obviously in a good position now, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was like the sun at noon. It was a pity that the three of them were already married. It was not that marriage was difficult, so why did they get married so early? The oldest, Luo Jingda, was only 23 years old. He had not even passed the Jinshe exam, so why did he get married? Sure enough, the other families were treacherous. They had taken in people early. However, the fourth young master and fifth young master of the Luo family had also grown up. One was 17 years old and the other was 16 years old. They were both from the first branch. Especially the fifth young master, who was the son of the first wife. Although he was not even a scholar yet, people did not think that he was uneducated. It was just that he had not gone back to take the exam. In the past 2 years, these two brothers had gradually become well known in the capital. Their momentum was similar to that of the three older brothers. For men, 16 or 17 years old was actually a little early to talk about marriage. However, Luo Jinghua had gotten married at 17 years old. If they waited any longer, he would be snatched away by other families. Therefore, the Luo family had become lively again recently. For the Luo family, this was not the first time, so they were able to deal with it easily. Regardless of whether one was happy or depressed, regardless of whether one was prepared to fight again next year or was disheartened at this time, it was more appropriate to have a good sleep. It was better to think about other things after sleeping in the dark. All the exam papers had been sealed and there was a professional transcribing them. The transcribed exam papers would be reviewed. After a unified ranking, it would be compared with the original exam papers. This step mainly depended on each candidate's handwriting. According to the quality of the handwriting, the rankings would be adjusted appropriately. There would not be a big fluctuation. Of course, if one's handwriting was not good, they might be eliminated directly. However, such a situation was not likely to happen. After all, if one's handwriting was not good, they would have been eliminated before. How could they reach this step? The possibility of a mistake being transcribed was not high. After all, once a mistake was made, the person who transcribed it would be severely punished after being discovered. By the time the rankings were released, all the candidates would be full of vigor and vitality. Although Jingwan was not nervous, she was more concerned about the final result. She also wanted to see the final ranking of her three brothers. Although the Huiyuan exam would be forgotten after a period of attention, it was fine as long as they passed the exam. To some extent, the ranking was meaningless. Even if they were the top scorer, they might not be able to have a meteoric rise. Even if they were the same as the Jinshe, they might not be unable to have a brilliant career. However, probably influenced by the exam-oriented education in her previous life, after every exam, who would not care about the ranking? Although the results this time might be forgotten before the next exam. With Jingwan's identity, there was no need for her to see it in person. Moreover, because of her husband, as long as she wanted to know the ranking in advance, it was just a matter of a word. However, Jingwan did not do such a thing. When Jingwan was leisurely eating melon seeds, Eunuch Mu came to report the good news to her. As a senior lackey, he naturally came to ask for the reward in person, although it was not him who went out to see the rankings. His face was obviously young but wrinkled because of Eunuch Mu's smile. He kept saying good things as if they were free. Eunuch Mu simply said that the three brothers of the Luo family were rare and unparalleled in the world. Jingwan slowly peeled a melon seed and put it into her mouth. It was more interesting to eat the melon seeds by herself. She chewed for a while and said, "Muan, that's enough. Get to the point." Eunuch Mu looked serious and quickly reported the ranking of the three brothers of the Luo family. They were very good. They were actually in the top 30. Before Jingwan got married, her grandfather had commented on the knowledge of the three brothers. There was not much difference between the three brothers. According to her grandfather, they would definitely pass the exam this time. But according to the situation at that time, they would probably rank in the top 100. If they were not lucky, they might become Jinshur in the palace exam. Looking at the actual ranking now, either they had worked hard in the past 2 years, or the overall level of the exam this time was low. Jingwan naturally preferred the former. With such an awesome person like Jiang Wanli, she naturally could not let others drag her down. Tell them that if I'm happy, everyone in the mansion will be rewarded with 3 months' salary. Those who are ordered by you to run errands will be rewarded with 3 more months' salary. Remember, take it from your share. Jingwan said in a small voice. Eunuch Mu immediately put on a bitter face. Yes, Your Highness. Then he went to carry out his task listlessly. Jingwan laughed. Although Mu En was a lackey in Jingwan's opinion most of the time, the lackeys were just there to amuse him. She knew that as the only chamberlain of the living king of hell, he would have an exaggerated personality. How should she put it? Amusing? Well, Jingwan definitely did not mean to be derogatory. It was said that servants followed their masters. Instead of saying that Moon En's real personality was like this, Jingwan felt that he was more like a eunuch who was in power in a certain dynasty in her previous life. He could be a kitten or a puppy in front of his master, but he was ruthless, decisive, and used power as he pleased. Of course, Moon En was definitely not at that level. After all, in Qiyuan, eunuchs were purely servants. At most, they could help their masters with some affairs. If they dared to meddle with power, they would not even know how they died. Jingwan was referring to Moon En's personality and ability, although she had not seen him being serious. If he was really like this, it was impossible for him to stay by a certain someone's side. The court examination would be held the next day. Li Hongyuan had attended the last court examination, but this time he had no intention of going. Anyway, the court examination's format was the same. It was just that the examinees were different every year. It might be interesting if it was held once or twice, but it would be completely boring if it was held too many times. In fact, Jingwan was quite curious. However, she knew that it was not an occasion for her to attend, so she decided not to. She would definitely have a chance in the future. Although she could not attend the court examination, Jingwan was still interested in the parade of the 3 grand scholars. Although she had experienced it 3 years ago, her status was different. It seemed that her state of mind had changed. The final rankings were sent to Jingwan first. Regardless of whether the location was good or not, as long as the people below flashed the waist token of Jin Qin Wang Fu, those who were tactful would have to give it up. They would also feel honored and would not have half a word of complaint. In the restaurant with the best location, in the private room with the best view, there were several young ladies of extraordinary birth, and there were also flower escorts at the side. At this very moment they were all respectfully standing at the door. Greetings to Jin Wangya Wang Fei. Li Hongyuan walked in with a cold face and looked straight ahead. Jingwan followed Li Hongyuan and sat down. She smiled and said, "You're all excused. Speaking of which, it's us husband and wife who snatched your place. I see that this place is quite spacious. If you want to stay, you can." There were nearly 10 men and women, and the servants accompanying them were not even here. They were already prepared to leave, but they didn't expect that Jin Qin Wang Fei would have such an easygoing attitude. Moreover, what snatched? If the living king of hell wanted it, wouldn't other people offer it with both hands? Wang Fei Nyang Yang is too serious. The fact is so, you don't need to be so reserved. Mama, let the shopkeeper have people rearrange it. Jingwan also saw that these people actually didn't want to leave. Especially the few young ladies. From the time they came in, they were obviously unwilling. Then when she allowed them to stay, their eyes lit up. Things were indeed as Jingwan thought. After all, they came with a purpose. It should be known that their identity was not that of the most distinguished group of people. To be able to book this place, it was not easy. Even if they offended people, it was normal for them to be unwilling. At this moment they were using their eyes to communicate with each other. Especially when they looked at one of the young ladies, her desire to stay seemed particularly strong. The one she was begging with pitiful eyes was probably her elder brother. In the end, the few big men were at their wits' end. Although the psychological pressure of being in the same room with the living king of hell was unusually large, they couldn't bear to refuse their own sisters. Moreover, the place had been rearranged. Jin Wangfei was pulled away by Jin Qin Wangfei. The table was moved to the side, another table was moved in and more chairs were added. To leave like this, it seemed that they didn't know what was good for them. Then we'll have to trouble Wangfei. Jingwan casually waved, do as you please. She turned her head to appease a certain someone who was obviously unhappy because of this group of people. The imperial family had always had privileges. It was just letting others give up their place, that's all. It was just that Jingwan felt that there was no need to be so overbearing. Besides, it was she who suddenly wanted to come. She didn't book a place before, so she felt somewhat apologetic. Of course, if her husband had a more distinguished identity, she wouldn't say anything and would definitely let people clear the place. Jingwan whispered to Li Hongyuan, smiling sweetly. Her side profile looked gentle and beautiful, making people somewhat unable to shift their eyes away. Originally, his wife was the biggest living hell and he was really angry. However, when he sensed some gazes, he followed the feeling and looked over. When he saw a certain man looking at his wife in a daze, his gaze really turned into a death ray. It was full of icy killing intent. Even if it was really foolish, it would probably be able to return to normal, not to mention just a little bit of absent-mindedness. That was also a handsome young Gongzi. He quickly shifted his gaze away in a sorry state. In an instant the cold sweat on his forehead flowed down. His heart pounded wildly as if someone was strangling his throat, almost suffocating him. The people beside him originally didn't notice, but this reaction was too big. Naturally, they hurriedly expressed their concern. It's nothing. You all should be quiet. Don't disturb Wang Ye and Wang Fei. The corner of his mouth stretched. He could say that it was because he was absent-minded while looking at Jin Qinhuang and was discovered by Jin Qinhuang, and then, at this moment he really experienced that gazes could really kill. Jin Qinhuang's gaze was really too frightening. Just now he really had an illusion that he was about to die. He couldn't wait to give himself 2 slaps. The handsome Gongzi tried his best to calm down, but it didn't have any effect. Instead, his body trembled uncontrollably. His heart was fearful and apprehensive. He always felt that Jin Qinhuang's gaze was still on him, but he didn't have the courage to take a look and verify it. Just at this time there was a hubbub outside. It was just that this hubbub was not the same as the usual lively celebration. Faintly, they seemed to hear something about the second place of the banquet fell from the horse on the last street and was unconscious. When Jingwan heard it, a Yuan's rebirth, many things had changed, but some things were still the same. Gong Jiao, quickly go and take a look. Gong Jiao went quickly and came back quickly. Wang Ye Wangfei, the person is already gone. Jingwan sighed softly. This life, was really, https://11/11807/137258884. Chapter 520. Now that this kind of thing has happened, I wonder if the parade will continue? Even though they knew that this kind of thing might happen, but when it happened it still affected their mood a little. The second place has died. For such an unlucky thing the parade will not stop. On the contrary, it will be even more grand. Li Hongyuan understood this kind of thing too well. How could a mere human life be more important than a good omen? Not to mention stopping the parade and letting the world's attention focus on the second place's death. They would only think of ways to resolve it and divert everyone's attention. If they could instantly forget about the second place's death, it would be even better. Because there was a living King Yama holding the fort, no one at the side spoke, no matter what they thought in their hearts. However, when Li Hongyuan spoke to Jingwan, his ears were perked up. But because Jingwan and Li Hongyuan were well aware of it, and because they didn't ask Gong Jiao about the other person's cause of death, the others didn't know. Therefore they couldn't remain calm. The second place died while riding a horse through the streets. When they didn't know the truth, anyone would make all kinds of guesses and even guess if there was a conspiracy behind it. However, Jin Qinhuang and Wang Fei didn't speak. They could only scratch their hearts and lungs in discomfort, and let their imaginations run wild. Just as Li Hongyuan said, they soon heard movement again. Obviously they didn't walk in, but Jingwan felt that it was even noisier than 3 years ago. The sound of gongs and drums filled the sky, and the voices of the people were like a boiling cauldron. It seemed that the second place's death didn't cause any impact. Clearly, when the second place fell from the horse, how many people saw it? Even the people at the back of the crowd probably knew about it. But now it seemed like there wasn't the slightest bit of impact. The news of the death was probably concealed for the time being. After all, it's normal for people of this age to fall ill. Being unable to participate in the parade, the world would at most sigh in pity. After the matter is settled and the cause is found, then it will be announced and the impact will be minimized. Who is in charge of holding the fort today? Li Hongyuan drank a cup of wine. Replying to Wang Yi, it's Li Daren, Swiqian of the Blackguard. Then it's not strange. Who was Li Xian? He had seen all kinds of situations, big and small. She had the ability to adapt. It did not affect the fact that the parade of 3 people had become 2 people. On the contrary, 2 of the 3 people were young and handsome. With an air-dried orange peel in the mix, it would be a total eyesore in the eyes of some people. The current situation was even more desirable. It could not be helped. After all, he was an official and had to go to the Hanlin Academy every day. Thinking of the sad scene of chasing and intercepting, she was inexplicably gloating. After seeing it, she could go home. Jingwan felt that she would not come to see it next time. Well, if nothing unexpected happened, she would not be able to see it even if she wanted to. She could not leave the palace casually. When she returned to the prince's residence, she only drank 2 mouthfuls of water before the servant hurriedly handed her a message. Li Hongyuan opened the letter and quickly glanced at it. Then he handed it to Jingwan. Jingwan put down the cup and took it. Prince Rui is going to use Jiang Wanli to create a case of cheating in the imperial examination? She felt that it was ridiculous. Just because of his absolute ability, he was used by others to take advantage of the loopholes. Is this news reliable? It was sent by Su Mingzhang. Then there was nothing more to say. https://11/1180713807/138204438. Mobile Edition. Chapter 521. I haven't looked for him yet, but he's already causing trouble. Perfect. Li Hongyuan's face was somewhat gloomy and cold. Jingwan folded the letter and then burned it unhurriedly. Someone was complaining that there weren't enough stains on his body, so he was still trying his best to make trouble. Was Prince Rui's plan good? It was undoubtedly good. If it succeeded, it would be a heavy blow to the Luo family. Not to mention whether Luo Peishan could keep his position, the 3 brothers of the Luo family would have their futures ruined. Jiang Wanli was Luo Peishan's youngest disciple. There was a saying, a teacher for a day is a father for life. It was definitely not a joke. If something happened to Jiang Wanli, Luo Peishan couldn't escape. Naturally, Luo Peishan couldn't stay out of it. In other words, Prince Rui's original goal was Luo Peishan. If he couldn't get him, he would destroy him along with the Luo family's roots. This move could be said to be vicious. Moreover, although the main target was the Luo family, the scope of the involvement was bound to be very wide. Of course, those who were responsible for setting the questions, depended on whether there were people of Prince Rui. If there were only a few people and most of them belonged to the opposing faction or were as stubborn as Luo Peishan, then he might as well abandon his own people and eliminate them all in one fell swoop. As the saying went, those who wanted to achieve great things didn't care about trifles. It was really not a big deal to abandon a few people. At worst, he would give more compensation in other aspects. Anyway, as long as he didn't lose his life, he could take it back when he sat on the throne in the future. It was a very simple matter. Therefore, there might be a lot of unlucky people. However, it wasn't so easy to make this thing perfect. Because if there wasn't such a thing, it was easy to make flaws in the evidence. Moreover, there was such a potential terrifying opponent. Even if Li Hongyuan didn't know about this in advance, when it happened, he would certainly have a way to salvage it. It was just a little troublesome. Moreover, now that he knew about it, Prince Rui's plan was even less likely to succeed. This didn't happen in your previous life, right? Jingwan asked curiously. Indeed not. Your grandfather is still the Minister of Rights. He doesn't involve himself in anything except for the matters of his job. He keeps a very low profile, which is completely different from the situation where he is on a killing spree right now. Naturally, people won't love and hate him. At the same time, he is a slick person and other people can't do anything to him easily. The value of the Ministry of Rights is obvious and there are a lot of things to do. Naturally, nobody will try to rope him in or step him down. Even if the Luo family had 3 jinshi at the same time, after all, they had just entered the officialdom. Their words carried little weight and could be ignored. Although Jiang Wanli was a jinshi, in essence it was just a good name. After entering the Hanlin Academy, he quickly kept a low profile and rarely contacted people. You've also severed ties with the Luo family. The Luo family is low-key and peaceful. So, the current Jiang Zhuangyun was actually implicated by his grandfather, and his grandfather was essentially implicated by you? Li Hongyuan's fingertips rubbed Jingwan's white and tender cheeks. The Luo family is destined to be implicated because you are destined to be mine. The corners of his mouth lifted without a hint of guilt. Anyway, you are a prince with no power or influence. Isn't it better if the Luo family doesn't get implicated? Jingwan said faintly. Wanwan, do you think it's possible? If I don't let the Luo family get implicated, won't the Luo family get implicated? Your father, in my previous life, always had a nominal position in the Ministry of Appointments. 3 years after I ascended the throne, he simply resigned. Now he is working hard to climb up the ranks. There's no need to talk about your grandfather. Not to mention that he is actually ambitious. Your grandmother probably won't allow him to stand by and do nothing. Whether or not she trusts me, she wants to give you a strong backing. So, after all this time, it's actually me who implicated you? Li Hongyuan smiled gently, which was exceptionally charming. I will protect them and make sure they are safe. Jingwan smiled as well. Of course, I believe in you. Her eyes curved into crescents and she was exceptionally warm. She leaned into Li Hongyuan's arms. Yuan, I feel that the Ministry of Appointments has too much power. As for the Ministry of Rights, those trivial matters can be easily delegated. If so, why don't we put the imperial examinations under the Ministry of Rights in the future? Li Hongyuan thought for a while. That's a good idea. That's not what I'm thinking. I'm standing on the shoulders of a giant, and the areas that I can influence are very limited. That's enough. No one can take care of everything. In your current position, you only need to provide an idea and a sentence. It's like suturing a wound and using anesthetics. Gong Jiu is already familiar with the former and has taught many people. As for the latter, Gong Jiu has already achieved some results. Didn't Wan say that the history of your previous life is very similar to the history of Qi Yuan? So, sooner or later, it will develop into something similar to your previous life. This is not something that can be done by 1 or 2 people. It requires the wisdom of millions of people. Jingwan looked at Li Hongyuan. To be honest, her husband seemed to have many sides. However, it had nothing to do with the so-called split personality. Moreover, his multifaceted nature seemed to be perfectly blended together and no one would think that there was a problem. But now he was like a wise man who could see through the course of history. He was truly unattainable. The time between the general examination and the court examination was very tight. Moreover, if they wanted to create a case of cheating, it seemed that they would have to decide after the court examination. Therefore, they would need some time to make arrangements. This time would be enough for Li Hongyuan to plan a counterattack. Or he might as well nip the matter in the bud. However, they did not know what the living king of hell was going to do. Jingwan looked at his arrangements. Obviously, it was the former. It made sense. Prince Rui didn't think there were enough stains on him, so he wanted to get more stains on him to lower Emperor Lu Qingdi's good impression of him. He was afraid that Emperor Lu Qingdi wouldn't be able to get back on his feet. Therefore, Emperor Lu Qingdi wanted to fulfill his wish. Therefore, they did nothing for the time being. They just waited for Prince Rui to make his move. Prince Rui's speed was faster than expected. It only took him 3 days. Moreover, the speed of the news was quite fast. It seemed that within a day, the entire capital knew that the new crown prince was accusing Yuan Jiang of cheating in the general examination. The reason why they did not mention the court examination was because the court examination was set by the emperor on the spot. There was no possibility of it being leaked in advance. No matter where he went, it seemed like everyone was talking about this matter. The commoners were still fine, but the scholars were all agitated, especially those who had participated in this examination but failed. It was as if they had failed because of Jiang Wanli, this scum, and without Jiang Wanli, it was as if they would have been able to pass the examination. In just 1 day, because of Jiang Wanli's relationship with the Luo family, the three brothers of the Luo family became the target of a crusade. Because Jiang Wanli was the top scholar, he was directly appointed as an editor of the Hanlin Academy. He didn't need to take the exam anymore and was already working in the Hanlin Academy. Because of this, Jiang Wanli was naturally ostracized and looked at with strange eyes, especially those who had been in the Hanlin Academy for many years. It could be said that they were not proud and had no hope of promotion. To a certain extent, they were just waiting for death to come. However, these people were still self-righteous and thought highly of themselves, or perhaps they had talent but didn't recognize it. In short, they just didn't look for problems with themselves. Of course, there were also those who were very knowledgeable and were indeed a little arrogant. They did not like some things, but it was rare for such people to follow the crowd. Every time a young person came, those who were not well-mannered would be sarcastic. Those who were well-mannered would be especially cold and not easy to get along with. Now Jiang Wanli, the top scorer, was obtained by cheating. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Or rather, they finally found a chance to vent their anger. Jiang Wanli was very knowledgeable, but he was also very well-mannered. Even if he did not do something, he would still be open and honest in the face of criticism. One must know that cheating was actually very serious. Even if the truth was found out in the end, the impact would be considerable. However, Jiang Wanli was not too worried. However, his attitude was very infuriating. With the Minister of Personnel Affairs as his backer, he is very confident. When Jiang Wanli heard this, he frowned slightly. He was good at reading, but he was not a bookworm. After becoming Luo Peisong's disciple, he had traveled to the south and north. He had seen all kinds of people. His EQ was not for show. Therefore, there were some things that he thought of the moment he knew about it. Now there was only one thought in his mind, as expected. Just as the others wanted to squeeze him, Li Xian appeared with a few people from the blackguard. The people present instantly fell silent. Jiang Wanli, because of the cheating incident, we will now take you back to assist in the investigation. Li Xian went straight to the point. Jiang Wanli's expression did not change. He packed his things and left. After they left, the remaining people immediately became restless. Even the blackguard has been dispatched. Looks like it must be true. He looks like a dog. I didn't expect him to be such a person. https://11/11807/138645050. Please wait patiently after reporting and refresh the page. Chapter 522. Jiang Wanli had actually heard of the terror of the black-robed guards. Anyone who was preparing to enter the officialdom would know about them, especially the existence of the black-robed guards, which made some people tremble in fear at the mere mention of them. Because of this understanding, even if Jiang Wanli was not afraid, he was still a little unsure. Because when he entered this place, it seemed like they would not interrogate him first but torture him first. Although he had followed his teacher around for the past few years, his background was still there. Even if he occasionally ate simple tea and plain tea, he had never suffered physical pain. The blackguard's torture should not be as simple as physical pain. Jiang Wanli clenched his fist a little uneasily. The blackguard's prison did not occupy a large area because there were no long-term residents here, and not just anyone could enter. Therefore, when Jiang Wanli stepped in, he was a little surprised by the environment. In his expectations, it should be damp and dark, filled with an unpleasant smell. But in reality, it was spacious, had plenty of light, and was clean enough. It was also not filled with all kinds of terrifying torture instruments that made people feel gloomy. Of course, not seeing it did not mean that it did not exist. After all, on the other side there was a house in the shadows. That place, Jiang Wanli looked away. His nostrils twitched slightly as if there was a faint smell of blood. Perhaps, this was the only thing that could make him feel fear in this place. What kind of method could make the smell of blood last for a long time? Just when Jiang Wanli thought that he would pass through the corridor in the middle of the cell and enter the shadows on the opposite side, the person who led the way in front opened the door and stood respectfully. "If Editor Jiang needs anything, you can tell me directly." Li Xian's eyebrows were still sharp and there was a faint murderous aura. Everyone knew that such a person was not easy to get along with. In fact, Li Xian was indeed not an easy person to get along with. He was cold-blooded and heartless. He did not even have a single friend and had always been alone in his private time. When Jiang Wanli heard this, his thoughts turned. He said with some uncertainty, "I think I will be here for some time. Can you find me a few books?" This was an obvious test. Li Suyen nodded and left decisively. He held the hilt of his waist knife and his back was straight. The remaining black-clothed guard made a pleased gesture to Jiang Wanli. Jiang Wanli had probed and Zhuqianshi had given him a clear answer. Therefore his heart had completely returned to its original place. He even felt somewhat at ease after entering the prison cell. The cell was empty. There was nothing in it. Jiang Wanli stood there thinking about the whole thing in his heart. After entering the prison of the blackguard, not only did he not receive any torture, but he also seemed to be treated quite well. From the looks of it to him, being captured by the blackguard was not so much a detention, but rather a protection. The word protect was on the tip of Jiang Wanli's tongue. Jiang Wanli turned around and saw a shocked expression on his face. He didn't expect to be tortured, his cell wasn't dirty and he even got 2 books. That was already a good treatment. But now, among the things that were carried in, there was not only a bed but the mattress and quilt on it. Although the material was not very good, it was clean and soft. Other than that, there was a writing desk and the 4 treasures of the study. The books that were brought in were not 2 books but a large stack. In addition, a screen was used to separate a space for a wash basin. The black-clothed guards moved quickly and swiftly. After they were done, they turned around and left without saying anything. Jiang Wanli suspected that he was really in a prison cell. Was it fake? Wasn't the prison of the blackguard a place that ate people up without spitting out their bones? When did it become so humane? However, after the initial shock, Jiang Wanli began to think about more things in his heart. The current head of the blackguard was Zhuqian Li Suyen. Even though he had a colleague above him, everyone actually obeyed his orders. The blackguard was directly under the emperor. Zhuqianshi was deeply trusted by Lu Qingdi. He could be said to be Lu Qingdi's right-hand man. He was a 100% pure official and was Lu Qingdi's absolute pawn. He was someone who would never be bribed. Jiang Wanli didn't think that Lu Qingdi would order Zhuqianshi to give him such preferential treatment. The emperor had given him no torture for the time being because he was a rare top scorer in the 3 yuan imperial examinations. It was already a great favor for him. Moreover, he didn't have any interaction with Zhuqianshi of the blackguard. As such, there was no possibility that he would give him preferential treatment because of their personal relationship. Then was it Lord Luo or the Jiang family? Obviously it was impossible. However, there was one point. This Zhuqianshi of the blackguard, who was said to not serve anyone other than the emperor, might actually have a second master. The worst thing was that he was no longer impartial when doing things. Jiang Wanli eliminated the possible candidates one by one and then locked his target on Jin Qinhuang. He had also heard a lot of rumors about Jin Qinhuang. However, he did not believe in those things. He agreed with his own judgment even though his interactions with Jin Qinhuang could only be counted on one's fingers only a few times. Jiang Wanli basically understood why there was such an unexpected disaster. He didn't have any complaints in his heart. Even though he didn't take the initiative to take a stand, but because he was Luo Peisong's disciple, he was forced to be labeled as the minister of the Ministry of Personnel. However, this didn't matter. After all, in the officialdom, there were only a few people who could be absolutely independent. In fact, compared to those who didn't have a background and didn't have a backer, he was much luckier. He didn't know how many people were envious and jealous of him. Correspondingly, he also had to be aware that he would be implicated. After all, the officialdom was like a battlefield. The struggle between factions and the struggle for benefits would never stop. After thinking it through, Jiang Wanli calmly accepted all of this. To be honest, after being implicated, he still fell into the hands of his own people and enjoyed this kind of treatment. It was the luckiest of the luckiest. Jiang Wanli flipped through the book. He didn't know where this book came from. Even though it wasn't a unique book, it looked very interesting. During lunch, 4 dishes and a soup were delivered. Even though they weren't very exquisite, the taste wasn't bad either. Even though these days couldn't be compared to the days at home, it was definitely much better than the days when he was roaming the world with his teacher. Of course, he wasn't complaining about the hardships of those few years. Every day was actually fun. It all depended on how one treated it. Obviously, Jiang Wanli thought that this was good enough. When night came, a big bucket of hot water was delivered from outside. His clothes were clean from inside to outside. They were obviously brand new. Soaking in the hot water was comfortable and pleasant. If the prison was treated like this, who knew how many people would think of ways to get in? Jiang Wanli was living a comfortable life in prison. He didn't ask about the situation outside. After all, he had just entered the officialdom and didn't know anything. Therefore, the best way was to not think about it. Otherwise, he would only be looking for trouble and suffering. Since he could live such a life in prison, it was obvious that he didn't need to worry about the things outside. What he needed to do now was to wait patiently. Once things were settled, he would naturally be able to leave. As for Prince Rui's side, they had planned this matter. At the beginning, they were still satisfied with the situation. They were prepared to let this matter ferment further. After all, it was still far from their final goal. Jiang Wanli was just a small champion. To be honest, they didn't care about him at all. A person like him, no matter how glorious he was, had just entered the officialdom and didn't have any real power. Such a person was completely not to be feared. Not to mention one, even if there were 10 or 100 of them, they wouldn't feel any heartache. Moreover, even people who cherished talents couldn't wait to get rid of the rising star of the enemy camp. However, the current situation was not within their expectations. In their plan, this matter should have been handed over to the Supreme Court. Although the minister of the Supreme Court was a rigid and inflexible old man, the entire Supreme Court wasn't completely united. There were more sensible and ambitious people. Prince Rui had plenty of people inside. As long as Jiang Wanli was detained in the Supreme Court, they could easily make him die there. They could also make it seem like he committed suicide for fear of punishment and leave a blood letter. Whatever happened later, even if it was fake evidence, would be confirmed because of this. Now that Jiang Wanli had been taken away by the blackguard was truly a monolithic unit. It was completely under the control of Li Suyen. There was no room for these people to intervene. Although the blackguard prison was basically a place of no return, even if Jiang Wanli was dead, this chess piece did not play the role it should have. Moreover, without Lu Qingdi's decree, Jiang Wanli would at most be a little disabled. In addition, Luo Peishan seemed to be completely unaffected. His 3 grandsons' examination was only suspended. Not to mention being detained, they couldn't even step out of the door. The people outside couldn't get in touch with them at all. Even if they wanted to do something, they couldn't do anything. This wasn't the situation that Prince Rui and the others wanted. The longer this matter was delayed, the more likely it was to go wrong. Unsurprisingly, Prince Rui and the others sped up the process. Their method was naturally to provoke the anger of the scholars. It was just that the matter was big enough, increasing the pressure on Lu Qingdi, and the speed of the investigation would increase. However, what Prince Rui didn't know was that the more he did, the more he would be caught. This was because every step he took was in the hands of Li Hongyuan. Unknowingly, the pit he dug was getting deeper and deeper. Moreover, it was prepared to bury him. The matter was indeed getting more and more intense, especially some scholars. They simply wanted to besiege the Luo family like they did once or twice in the past. However, this plan was ultimately dispelled. Whether it was the Minister of Personnel or the great scholars all over the world, they had to be careful. Therefore, more or less, they still had some rationality. The matter was indeed getting more and more intense. Moreover, the deceased's second place had also been dragged into the mud. The best proof was that the second place had fallen repeatedly. Some of his essays from before the competition had also been dug up, proving that he was far from being capable of becoming second place. Jiang Wanli was ahead of the others because of his superior ability. The second place was because of his lack of ability. It was laughable to say that, but there were people who believed it. Lu Qingdi also had a headache. He handed the matter over to the blackguard to investigate. After a few days, there was no result. Naturally, he called Li Suyen over to inquire about the situation. Your Majesty, the matter is almost done. In fact, as we said at the beginning, there is an 80 to 90% chance that someone is behind this. Now we just need to catch the mastermind. At most, in 2 or 3 days, the truth will be revealed. Lu Qingdi nodded. Thank you, Suyen. In short, settle this matter as soon as possible. Yes. Therefore, he didn't touch the Luo family and only captured Jiang Wanli. Firstly, it was to protect him. Secondly, it was to appease the people. Now those scholars were causing trouble again and again. Lu Qingdi was also annoyed. He could be easily incited by others. It was obvious that he didn't have any subjective opinions. How could such a person be a good official? Lu Qingdi directly ordered people to drag out the group of people who caused the most trouble. He didn't take away their scholarly achievements. Without saying anything, he directly banned them from the examination for 30 years. Not everyone could persevere for 30 years. After 30 years, some people might be buried in the ground. The effect of punishing the chicken to warn the monkey was very obvious. The people who caused trouble stopped immediately. What was the purpose of these people studying? Wasn't it because they wanted to be an official? Whether it was for power and benefits, to bring glory to their ancestors, or to really care for the world, in short, they had to enter the officialdom first. If their path was cut off, all their thoughts would be in vain. Therefore, no matter how indignant they were, they could only shrink back. Most of the officials finally felt that Luchingdi had done a good thing. However, that night, Prince Rue met the current Minister of Rights. This Lord Su went straight to the point and asked Prince Rue to quickly stop. He was very certain that this matter would definitely not succeed. If it continued, it would only expose Prince Rue in front of Luchingdi. It was a good thing that the prepared scapegoat was sent out. Lord Su, please give this prince an explanation. Prince Rue was indignant, but now he had a lot of reliance on him, so he had to give him some face. Wangye Luo Peishan has been too quiet in this matter. Not only him, there are other loyal court officials, even the emperor. It is enough to see that there may be some things between them that we don't know. It is even possible that from the beginning of the layout, it has been noticed by others. Previously, I had already told Wang Ye that Jin Qinwang, this person, should not be underestimated. Although we cannot find anything, but the most unusual point is that it is impossible for a person like Jin Qinwang to not have any ambition. Therefore, we would rather believe that he is hiding too deeply and not be deceived by the appearance that he is showing now. Being more on guard, it is naturally best if there is nothing. If there is something, then we will not be caught unprepared. Stopping at this time, to a certain extent, we can also test Prince Jin. https://11/118007/138894074. Mobile Edition. Chapter 523. Although Prince Rue was unwilling, he wasn't someone who didn't listen to advice. 2 days later, he was very glad that he listened. Luchingdi directly threw out the evidence in the imperial court. This time he didn't fly into a rage. However, from his gloomy face, it was obvious that he was very, very angry. Sometimes, it was better to vent one's anger than not to discover it, whether it was directed at the person who was angered or the person who was angry. Luchingdi ordered his men to remove the black veil and official robes of 2 people. However, this wasn't enough. Then they were directly sent to the northwest where they needed manpower. Moreover, their descendants were forbidden from entering the imperial court. Those who were already in the imperial court were also stripped of their black veils. At the beginning, they expected to lose their official position at most. Prince Rue also promised that they would be able to return soon. However, Luchingdi didn't show any mercy. Since he had personally issued the imperial edict, even if Prince Rue ascended the throne in the future, he couldn't go against his father's will. In this way, the sacrifices they made wouldn't be for the sake of greater benefits. Instead, it was purely for the sake of losing their lives. Not only did they lose their lives, but they also implicated their families and descendants. Then, the situation that they worked so hard to build up would completely collapse in an instant. These 2 people stood at the front of the imperial court. It was obvious that their official positions weren't low. At this moment, they finally knew fear. They kowtowed and begged for mercy. One of them even said that he was innocent. Luchingdi couldn't be bothered to listen to their nonsense. He directly ordered the imperial guards to drag them out. During this process, Prince Rue's back was drenched in sweat. He was afraid that he would be exposed. However, he didn't dare to raise his head or make any strange movements. After all, if he didn't do anything, he could still say that he was innocent. If he jumped out and said that he was the one who exposed himself, it would be a confession without being pressed. Last time, because of the grain incident in the northwest, he was grounded. Because of the birth of his son, he was released. This time, if he was caught in this incident, then it wouldn't be as simple as just being added to the production team. After he was dragged out, Prince Rue clearly heaved a sigh of relief. However, Prince Rue didn't know that he had breathed a sigh of relief too early. He didn't know that because he wanted to act as if this matter had nothing to do with him, and perhaps because he was afraid he had gone a bit too far. Everyone else was whispering to each other, but he was the only one who was too quiet. Wouldn't that expose him again? So much so that Luchingdi saw it all. This was a classic example of a cover-up. Prince Rue used to be the son that Luchingdi thought the most highly of, but he was disappointed time and time again. Luchingdi now felt that this son was really like his mother, used to putting on an act in front of him. So much so that he was deceived by this mother and son for so many years. If it wasn't for the fact that he was his son, he would have killed him long ago. Minister Su of the Board of Rites discreetly looked at Prince Rue, then looked at Luchingdi. He frowned slightly and sighed helplessly in his heart. In his opinion, Prince Rue's temperament was actually not bad, but in the end he was facing his own father and the monarch at that. He had a natural fear, and with two identities this fear was doubled. Thus, once the emperor got angry, he couldn't control his emotions. In this aspect he was far worse than Prince Jean. Prince Rue was suddenly called out by Luchingdi and was clearly startled. He was clearly guilty and afraid. This subject is here. Prince Rue tried his best to maintain his composure and didn't let himself stutter. Luchingdi knew very well about the real mastermind behind the scenes. Just two court officials, because the minister of the Board of Rites offended them unintentionally, they would gamble their future and do this kind of stupid thing? With the current situation, it was obvious who was behind it. There were only a few people. If the tale was swept clean, showing cowardice was the same as being exposed. Luchingdi unceremoniously reprimanded Prince Rue. He was becoming more and more mediocre and incompetent, making people disappointed. For Prince Rue, this was definitely the most unbearable thing. However, after being scolded as trash last time, his ability to accept this inexplicably increased a lot. After being scolded by Luchingdi, he calmed down instead. When Luchingdi finished scolding, he knelt down and asked for forgiveness. Luchingdi stared at this son, his face expressionless, unable to tell whether he was happy or angry. After a moment of silence, he waved his hand. Court is dismissed. Luo Peishan and the others were completely unaffected. They did what they should do. As for the aftermath of this cheating case, it was quickly and cleanly dealt with. No one had the time to care about the mood of those troublemakers. Jiang Wanli quickly came out of the blackguard's prison. At this time he naturally had to go back first to get rid of the bad luck and calm down. There were still many people paying attention to him, but seeing that he was in good spirits and the way he walked was still calm, it seemed that he didn't suffer much in the blackguard's prison. Sure enough, Sheng was wise and had long seen that something was wrong. Jiang Wanli was taken back by a servant in a carriage. It was a small house that he and Luo Peisong used to live in. However, it was believed that soon, Jiang Wanli's family would be in shock, and Luo Peisong could also return to the Luo family. Seeing his little disciple approach, Luo Peisong glanced at him and silently looked away. "Teacher, I just came out of prison. Didn't you have someone prepare a brazier? Look at your rosy face. You've put on a lot of weight. Are you sure you need to get rid of the bad luck?" Luo Peisong didn't hold back. Jiang Wanli smiled. He was indeed a little fat, but people who weren't familiar with him shouldn't be able to see it. He knew that his teacher had a strange temper, so it was best to stop before going too far. https://11/11807/139199909. Thinking about it, if they could get on his good side, they did not know how many detours they would take. In Jiang Wanli's eyes, he was clear in his heart. No matter what kind of attitude he had, he was very slippery and evasive. He seemed to be very easy to talk to, but in fact he did not say anything. The examination of the Scholar of Merit was postponed for a few days. The three Luo brothers successfully passed the examination and then went to Hanlin Academy to laze around. Although it was said that those who were not Jinsher could not enter Hanlin Academy, and those who were not Hanlin Academy could not enter the cabinet, was the minister of the Ministry of Personnel so ambitious to put all three of his grandsons into Hanlin Academy? One must know that after entering Hanlin Academy, one generally had to endure 3 years of experience. It was impossible to be promoted without special circumstances. Now the Ministry of Revenue was still short of manpower, and there were also vacancies in other places. As the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Luo Peishan wanted to seek benefits for his 3 grandsons. As long as it was not too excessive, no one would mind some of the better positions. With him as a backer, even if they were new to the officialdom and had no experience, they would definitely be able to do well. Now all of them were pushed into Hanlin Academy. What was the meaning of this? Obviously, Luo Peishan began to keep a low profile after being high profile. In fact, many people in high positions knew that it was not necessarily a bad thing to stay in Hanlin Academy for 3 years. After 3 years, the situation might have completely stabilized. At that time, there would still be competition, but it would not be like during the fight for the throne where they might lose their lives. It was said that Luo Peishan was an old fox. It was definitely not a joke. Another storm had subsided. Of course, this was only on the surface. Moreover, even if it really subsided, there would be another wave in the dark. It was hard to tell when it would come out. The weather was getting hotter, but the matters in the northwest were still not completely dealt with. It was already May and it was the Dragon Boat Festival. There were too many things to do. Luchingdi did not have the leisure to go out of the palace to watch the dragon boat race. However, he held a banquet in the palace, inviting civil and military officials above the 3rd rank and their families. Is Ai Yuan going to make a move at the banquet? Jingwan asked curiously. Make a move? Wanwan, you think too much. I just want to be a spectator. Why should I make a move? Jingwan raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, then, let's wait and see. https://11/11807/139654746. Chapter 525. She wanted to see if noble consort Su and Prince Ray could still make a comeback after this. If they could still make a comeback, Jingwan would admit that they were cockroaches that couldn't be killed easily. However, no matter how tenacious this cockroach was, once it was aimed, it was only a matter of a shoe sole. Don't talk about killing it, even slapping it into dregs was fine. On festive days, Jingwan had always dressed herself up jubilantly. In the beginning, it was because Gong Mama and the others deliberately dressed her up in this aspect. Later on, Jingwan herself was used to it. In any case, whether it was winter or summer clothes, those clothes that were mainly red, silver and other colors, she was able to suppress them. In addition, her complexion was good and her skin was good. That kind of dressing made her whole person even more radiant and seemed to be even more beautiful. No matter how one looked at it, there was no family's Wang Fei or Jun Wang Fei that could be compared to her. At this time, no one could deceive themselves to think that Jin Qinhuang's feelings for Jin Qinhuang Fei didn't exist. Everything that Jin Qinhuang did was pretended. Jin Qinhuang clearly held her in the palm of his hand like a treasure. Don't say that Jin Qinhuang jinxed his wife. Other than the Wang Fei, no other woman could get close to him. Jin Qinhuang might jinx those who had a status with him, but those who didn't have a status were completely fine. Looking at those in the past, it was the best proof. If Jin Qinhuang wanted, he could raise as many beauties as he wanted. However, ever since he got married, was there still a mess of women by his side? Jin Qinhuang was henpecked? Don't joke around. Jin Qinhuang was the famous living king of hell. Someone who could even throw away his own father's face, would he be henpecked? Therefore, after all was said and done, it could only be the most impossible possibility. How many people were burning with jealousy, but all of them could only put it in their hearts. So what if they were jealous? Last time, the two Jin Qinhuangs prospective Tsefei, if they didn't leave the house, then they died in their sedan chairs. Even if they wanted to share Jin Qinhuang's favor, even if they yearned for Jin Qinhuang Fu's glory, splendor and wealth, or adored Jin Qinhuang as a person, then they must have the life to step into Jin Qinhuang Fu. If they couldn't do this step, then what else could they talk about? It must be said that Jin Qinhuang Fei is indeed blessed. Otherwise, why would Jin Qinhuang, who was once in the midst of hundreds of flowers, take a fancy to her, even to the point of giving up his heart for her? However, in the end, it's still a little too little. After being favored alone for more than 2 years, there's still no movement in her belly. Everyone knows that Jin Qinhuang Fu's physician is very skilled, but it's still like this. I'm afraid that Jin Qinhuang may have disdained those women's status in the past and thought that they were not fit to be the mother of his children. Needless to say, the people around them all laughed without knowing the meaning behind it. What did it mean? It couldn't be any more obvious. How long could Jin Qinhuang Fei be proud of herself? It was just these few years. Jin Qinhuang was already 25 years old. It couldn't be that when he reached 30 he still didn't have a son or half a daughter. At that time, there was no need for others to do anything. Jin Qinhuang Fei herself would have to bring people into Jin Qinhuang Fu. Even if she kept the children and left the mother behind, how long could she last? Even if Jin Qinhuang was a sentimental person, but when Jin Qinhuang Fei was 30 or 40 years old, would you still have the face to serve her in bed? If you don't want face, then this man would also be boring. Which man wasn't the same, not liking delicate and tender little girls, but liking an old and haggard woman? Thinking like this, the jealousy in their hearts faded. However, these people seemed to only be able to talk about this. Every time their hearts were unbalanced just thinking about it like this, there was indeed some effect. The method of mental victory would not be ineffective anywhere. Jingwan could actually feel those gazes, but from the beginning she didn't care. Those sisters-in-law of hers might have used this to provoke her in the beginning, but after eating a loss they were basically honest. But now, among the princes who were conferred the title of prince, it seemed that only Jin Qinhuang didn't have a son. That's right, even on the surface, Prince Rui couldn't use this point to attack him. In fact, after Prince Rui's son was born, many people who supported him became more determined. It was just that Prince Rui himself still didn't have the emperor's heart. The empress' illness had not improved, imperial concubine Su was grounded, and even if Wei Xianfei gave birth to a son, her body was damaged because of premature birth, so the child wasn't that good. Moreover, when she gave birth, Jingwan disliked Lu Qingdi once, so the joy of old age was gone. Lu Qingdi also didn't like that mother and son pair. Wei Xianfei didn't have a mother's status because of her son, and now she was getting worse and worse than before. She couldn't even compare to the other lower-ranked concubines who had children. After calculating, the woman closest to Lu Qingdi was still Qin Shufei. After Jingwan returned to the capital, she went to the palace to see Qin Shufei. She looked good and didn't have the abnormality she had before they went to the northwest. At the banquet, Lu Qingdi also put aside those troublesome matters, which was rare for him. However, there would always be people with bad intentions who would think of ways to bring the matter to Jin Qinhuang Fei's sore spot. It was natural for Lu Qingdi to ask about it. Sure enough, Lu Qingdi's face sank. Looking at Jingwan, he was still satisfied with this daughter-in-law. However, if she couldn't have children, that would be a big mistake. Lao Lu's wife, Jin, knows that you are a good person, but Lao Lu can't not have children. Jin doesn't care how you husband and wife are, children are a must. The smile on Jingwan's face didn't change. Fu Huang, what are you talking about? Not having children may not be a woman's problem. Jin Qinhuang faintly cut off Jingwan's words. His words weren't heavy, but it was enough to make the scene freeze. Which family didn't have children? Then the problem was definitely a woman. When Jin Qinhuang's words came out, everyone looked at him strangely. In the end, was he really unscrupulous? Or was there really a problem? However, no matter which one it was undoubtedly to help Jin Qinhuang Fei out of her predicament. https://11/11807/139977813. Chapter 526. Lu Qingdi was so angry that he smashed his cup, but Jin Qinhuang didn't even give him a glance. Lu Qingdi scolded his unfilial son several times, then his cold gaze swept towards Jingwan. Obviously, in his opinion, there was no problem with his son. The one with a problem was his daughter-in-law. Moreover, she seduced his son to disregard his dignity to protect her. She was undoubtedly a foxy seductress. No matter how good his impression of her was before, now it had reached the freezing point. As long as the emperor's mind was still clear, it was a taboo to favor only one person, and it was the same for his son. Because in their opinion, once he was bewitched by a woman, it was easy to do wrong. Moreover, as a member of the imperial family, especially the emperor's son, they were the most honorable group of people in the world. How could they be tied up by a woman? Even when Lu Qingdi wanted to tie the imperial Gui Fei to himself, he didn't absolutely favor only her. Moreover, the imperial Gui Fei had never whispered in his ear. Therefore, Lu Qingdi never felt that he did anything wrong. Jingwan helplessly glanced at her husband. Say it's fine if you're the one pulling the hatred, but don't drag her into it as well. Clearly, it's fine if you're just going to brush it off with a few words. Although it's because you, as a son, schemed against him, he's still the emperor, the one with the most authority in Qiyuan on the surface. It was just that Jingwan looked at his indifferent appearance. Forget it, what kind of virtue he had, didn't she already know it? Therefore, Jingwan also calmed down and didn't say anything. Lu Qingdi's cold gaze was also ignored. Looking at the couple who didn't put him in their eyes, Liqingdi was angry. However, he couldn't really do anything to them. His son was reluctant, but what about his daughter-in-law? He was the father-in-law and the emperor. If he made a fuss over such a small matter, it would be beneath his dignity. His eyes turned and fell on the courtiers. Iching Luo Peishan's face was slightly frightened, but his heart was as calm as the couple. Just as he was about to get up, he saw Zhongqing walking from the side to a place a few steps below the emperor's seat. The banquet was held in the imperial garden. Reporting to the emperor, Princess Heyong requests an audience. He carried a saber and stood tall and straight. Compared to Li Xian, Yu Zhongqing was full of righteousness and had an extraordinary bearing. Yu Zhongqing was still unmarried and was coveted by many people. However, on the surface, Yu Zhongqing was alone and did not care about marriage. To some extent, Liqingdi also hoped that Yu Zhongqing would work for him wholeheartedly. Once Yu Zhongqing got married, he would be selfish and have weaknesses. Therefore, when Liqingdi asked Yu Zhongqing hypocritically and Yu Zhongqing flatly refused, the matter was left unsettled. Many people wanted to act as matchmakers for him, but the commander of the Imperial Guards was missing and unapproachable. In fact, Yu Zhongqing originally had a fiancée. Although she was dead, he had rejected other people. Other than the fact that he was deeply in love with his fiancée and wanted to avenge her, there was also his family's blood feud. Other than that, he also knew Liqingdi's thoughts. Since that was the case, why did he need to start a family? Later, we'll talk about it later. Now, Yu Zhongqing was not the focus. The focus was on his words. Speaking of which, most people knew who Princess Heyong was. After all, what she had done in the past was too valiant. However, not many people knew that she was still alive. Now, except for those who clearly knew, the rest were still wondering which of the princesses had the title Heyong. It seemed that neither the princesses nor Liqingdi's sisters had the title Princess Heyong. So who on earth was she? Those who knew were surprised. Princess Heyong had no contact with the royal family on the surface. Otherwise, how could most people not know that there was a princess in the royal family who was more honorable than Great Elder Princess? Great Elder Princess's honor came from the fact that she had the same mother as Liqingdi and was self-aware. However, even Liqingdi had to respect Princess Heyong. Princess Heyong rarely went to Liqingdi. But once she did, it was definitely not a trivial matter. Let's not talk about the distant past. Just in the recent years, there was once at the western border 3 years ago. Because of the problem of soldiers' pay and provisions, there was almost a war. Last year, hundreds of thousands of grains disappeared without a trace, and the entire Ministry of Revenue was almost confiscated. But now, she directly revealed her identity as a princess. How could Liqingdi not be shocked? He also complained in his heart. Why can't they talk about it in private? Why can't they talk about it another time? Why must they talk about it in public on such an important festival? Why can't they stop talking about it? No matter what Liqingdi thought in his heart, he couldn't say it out, let alone ignore it. However, Jingwan's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Li Hongyuan. She didn't forget his main purpose of coming to the palace today. Jingwan now had to suspect that Prince Rui's son actually had something to do with Princess Heyong. Then it could only be said that the King of Hell was still fast, accurate, and ruthless. He not only dug a hole but also filled it with thorns and buried a sharp knife in it. Li Hongyuan seemed to feel Jingwan's attention. He turned around and looked at her. He smiled as if he had confirmed Jingwan's idea. Jingwan narrowed her eyes slightly and also smiled. She didn't say anything. She also knew how to watch a play. Princess Heyong was dressed in a formal dress, looking graceful, luxurious, and domineering. Her aggressive momentum made Jingwan unable to hide the surprise on her face at the first time when she saw her. However, at this moment, everyone's attention was on Princess Heyong, so Jingwan quickly concealed her surprise. But the strange look in her eyes couldn't disappear. The current Princess Heyong was completely different from the Yun Yang that Jingwan knew, except for her face. Yun Yang's clothes and manners were all like a prostitute. The current Princess Heyong was like an empress, let alone a princess. If she didn't know Yun Yang's identity, Jingwan would probably think that they were just two people who looked alike. Princess Heyong stood under the throne with a cold face. She squatted and said, "Your Majesty." It seemed that she didn't care about it. Her face almost said, "I'm in a very bad mood. Imperial Aunt, please rise." Liqingdi was displeased because of Princess Heyang's attitude, but he looked very attentive on the surface. After that, everyone present stood up and saluted. Even Great Elder Princess was very respectful and didn't dare to neglect her at all. Imperial Aunt, you refused every time I invited you to a banquet. I'm very happy that you can come today. Come on, set up a banquet for Imperial Aunt. No need. Princess He Yang directly waved her hand and interrupted Lu Qingdi. I have something to do. I'll leave after dealing with it. The smile on Lu Qingdi's face froze for a moment, but it disappeared in a flash. Imperial Aunt had made a lot of contributions to the Qi Yuan, so even if he was unhappy he could only endure it. What do you want me to do? Do you need me to do anything? Princess He Yang glanced at him and then looked around. Finally, her eyes fell on the table where Prince Rui was sitting. Princess He Yang flicked her sleeves and walked straight over. Prince Rui's heart beat inexplicably. He stood up and said, "What can I do for you, Imperial Aunt?" His attitude was humble and his face was gentle. Those who didn't know him would at least have a good impression of him. Princess He Yang glanced at him from head to toe and still didn't change her expression. Then she turned her eyes to Princess Lu, the child in her arms. Let me have a look. He probably didn't expect that Princess He Yang was aiming at the little heir of Prince Rui. Maybe because of his guilty conscience, Prince Rui only felt his heart beat faster. Imperial Aunt, although this boy is only a few months old, his hands are strong enough and he's noisy. I'm afraid that he will hurt you, so, before he could finish, Princess He Yang bent down and picked up a cup on the table. She crushed it and threw it at Prince Rui's face. Am I not as good as your wife? Prince Rui couldn't maintain the gentle look on his face. Please forgive me, Imperial Aunt. When Prince Rui was about to say something, Princess Lu had already stood up and handed the child to Princess He Yang. Because of this unknown child, Princess Lu's own daughter was worried sick because she didn't know what was going on with her. Princess Lu looked very pale. She didn't dare to go out without putting on a thick layer of powder. The reason why she showed up at this banquet was that her husband threatened her with her other two daughters and asked her to pretend that she was in a good mood. After all, she finally had a son and got what she wanted. However, holding this child, she wanted to strangle him to death. Therefore, at this moment she didn't hesitate to give the child away, no matter what the purpose of this noble princess who she didn't know was. Prince Rui subconsciously wanted to snatch the child, but Princess He Yang slapped the back of Prince Rui's hand. At that moment, Prince Rui only felt that his hand was numb from the pain. He withdrew his hand and hid it in his sleeve, clenching his fist. Princess He Yang didn't feel strange with the child in her arms, but she was obviously a little careful. Princess He Yang let the noisy little boy lie on her shoulder and then lifted his little clothes. Her eyes fell on the back of the little boy's waist. There was a red birthmark half the size of a palm. It was very eye-catching. Princess He Yang's movements were gentle, but her expression became colder and colder. When she looked at Prince Rui again, her eyes seemed to be filled with ice. Prince Rui didn't know the specific situation, but there was a faint voice in his heart telling him that if this was exposed, he would end up very miserably. His body couldn't help trembling slightly. Prince Rui told himself to calm down. No matter what, he had to slap. With a clear sound, Prince Rui, a big man, was directly slapped by Princess He Yang. He staggered and almost fell. Princess He Yang swung her hand. You can't give birth to a son, but you dare to have ideas about my grandson. You're really something. Prince Rui was furious. He originally wanted to argue with Princess He Yang, but when he heard this, there was a buzzing sound in his head as if he had been hit hard with a hammer. He was completely dumbfounded. The others also exploded. After a short time of digesting the news, they began to talk about it with a buzz. Jingwan approached Li Hongyuan. Princess He Yang has a son? He was obviously shocked. She doesn't lack men. What's so strange about having a son? Li Hongyuan glanced at Jingwan, thinking that Jingwan was making a fuss about nothing. Know that. She was a royal princess after all. It was fine if she kept a gigolo, but if she had an illegitimate son, wouldn't it be? Wanwan is not an ordinary person. Why can't she accept this? Princess He Yang is also an extraordinary person. Naturally, she can't be treated with common sense. If she took the royal family's reputation seriously, she wouldn't be the Princess He Yang today. She would be like other princesses, ordinary, unhappy, and die in some unknown corner. Obviously, the two extraordinary people Li Hongyuan mentioned were not the same thing. Jingwan was startled and then she smiled. I was thinking too much. I only thought that the women in the world were not too different, so I was too shocked. I forgot that no matter where you are, there are always some very special people. If it was Li Hongyuan in his previous life, he would definitely not be able to accept this kind of thing when there was a big change. But now he accepted it very well. In other words, because it had nothing to do with him, he didn't care in essence. How many children does Princess Heyong have? Once Jingwan accepted it completely, she began to gossip. The only son who has just turned 20 years old. Princess Heyong arranged a good place for him and his biological father. Coincidentally, his wife and third princess sister-in-law's third child were conceived around the same time, Li Hongyuan said lightly. So he was cruelly used by you. Because everyone was talking and their attention was on Prince Rui and Princess Heyong, the two of them talked quite openly. Prince Rui only felt that it was over, completely over. When he first received the child and saw the birthmark on his back, he also felt that it was a little inappropriate. But when he thought that the child's family had been killed, he gave up. After all, it was not a big deal to have a birthmark on one's body. But if it was scalded or cut off for no reason, it would be noticed by others. Under normal circumstances, no one could easily see the body of a prince's heir except those who were closest to him and took care of him carefully. But now he actually fell into the trap of this birthmark. What was the problem? Why was the child Princess He Yang's grandson? Sure enough, he was schemed against from the beginning to the end. Great Aunt. https://11/11807/140359553. Mobile edition. Chapter 527. Shut up. I don't want to hear a word from you now. You don't need to quibble. Your daughter is in my hands. Princess Heyong carefully protected the child. There was no warmth in her eyes. She looked at Prince Rui with a stern look in her cold eyes. It was almost written on her face that if he dared to say another word, it would not be settled with just a slap. However, before Prince Rui could react, Princess Lu's face changed greatly. My darling is in your hands? Princess, can you give her back to me? Princess Lu was indifferent to what happened in front of her, but now she couldn't hold it anymore. It was not an exaggeration to say that she broke down in an instant. Princess Lu pulled Princess Heyong's clothes and knelt in front of her with a sorrowful face. Princess, please give my darling back to me. After she was born, I didn't even have time to look at her before she was taken away. Princess, I beg you. Princess Lu had no idea about Prince Rui's great cause. No matter whether he succeeded or not, she didn't expect to get any benefits. Maybe she once had the ambition to be the mother of the country, but some things had been worn away by the accumulation of time. She knew Li Hongming too well. When Princess Lu said this, well, there was no need to say anything. As one of the main characters, he had admitted it. Then there was nothing to say. It was useless to quibble. Even if Lu Qing wanted to cover for him or to cover the shame of the royal family, it was impossible. At this moment it was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. However, everyone had different thoughts. Those who sided with Prince Rui were grieving, while those who opposed Prince Rui were naturally delighted. They couldn't hide their joy and schadenfreude no matter how hard they tried. They could only use other things to hide it. However, no one would pay attention to them at this moment. Of course, there were also some who were expressionless and didn't feel the slightest fluctuation in their hearts, because this had nothing to do with them. However, looking at Prince Rui, although he knew that he couldn't escape this time, there was no room for negotiation since Princess Lu had revealed everything. Prince Rui naturally wanted to eat her alive. However, Princess Lu pretended not to see it. She just kept begging Princess Heyong. Did Princess Lu lose her mind and reveal everything because she knew the whereabouts of her daughter? Of course not. After all, Princess Lu was not crazy. She should know the severity of the matter. Therefore, it was one thing for her to lose her composure after hearing the whereabouts of the children. She also did it on purpose. She had completely fallen out with Li Hongming. To some extent, if Li Hongming ascended the throne, it would not benefit her at all. Moreover, because she knew too much, she might be killed at some time in the future. Moreover, as time went by, Princess Lu increasingly felt that Li Hongming's chances of ascending the throne were slim. Instead of this, it was better to take advantage of the current situation. Moreover, if Li Hongming fell, she would have the possibility of keeping her child. Not to mention that she didn't care about their relationship as husband and wife. It was this man who didn't care about his own flesh and blood first. Princess Haeyong waved her hand to push Princess Lu away and didn't pay attention to her at all. Was the little commandery princess of Prince Rue's mansion really in Princess Haeyong's hands, or was it just a lie she made up? If it was the former, she wouldn't say how she would deal with the child. Princess Haeyong looked at Emperor Lu Qingdi. Obviously, she didn't want to keep her here and let irrelevant people laugh at her. I think His Majesty already knows about this matter and will give me a satisfactory explanation. I won't say anything more and will leave now. Obviously, Princess Haeyong was very angry because of this matter. She was perfunctory in front of Emperor Lu Qingdi, or a little bit dangerous. When she came, she was domineering and arrogant, but when she left, she was decisive. At this moment, Emperor Lu Qingdi's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. As the emperor, he was humiliated in such a way, but he couldn't lose his temper. The initiator of this was his son, whom he had high hopes for, but he did stupid things again and disappointed him. This time he was even bolder and tried to confuse the royal bloodline. He even offended Princess Haeyong. In fact, Emperor Lu Qingdi was so tolerant of Princess Haeyong not only because of her contributions to Qi Yuan, but also because his imperial aunt had an imperial edict in her hand. The imperial edict was stamped by the late emperor. The reason why it was stamped was that it was left by Emperor Lu Qingdi's grandfather. Although it wasn't something like a death sentence, it was enough to ensure that Princess Haeyong could live unscrupulously. Prince Rue is demoted to a commoner and imprisoned in the mansion. He is not allowed to take a step out. Emperor Lu Qingdi didn't even bother to say anything more. He directly sentenced Li Hongming to death and then directly stood up and left. https://11/11807/1403594. Mobile edition. Chapter 528. Now that things had escalated to this point, this banquet naturally couldn't continue. However, such a big fun also needed to be properly digested. Therefore, whether it was good or not, everyone left one after another. Although it wasn't time yet, but presumably the emperor wouldn't have any objections. What's more, it was Jin Qinhuang who took the lead. After watching this good show, Li Hongyuan was naturally the first to leave with Jingwan. He left in a natural and unrestrained manner. Although he was not as domineering as Princess Haeyong when she came and left, in terms of influence, Princess Haeyong could not be compared to him. After all, Princess Haeyong had long become a past tense. No matter how famous she was in the past, the effect she had now was quite limited. When they returned to the carriage, Jingwan's emotions showed on her face. She sighed with a little surprise. Ah Yuan, if Princess Haeyong knew that she suffered an unexpected calamity and was schemed against by you because of her unique identity, I wonder what expression she would have? Princess Haeyong liked to tease people, but Jingwan did not have any bad feelings towards her. However, thinking of how Princess Haeyong must have been anxious because of her grandson's disappearance in the past few months, and maybe she would have blisters on her mouth, Jingwan inexplicably gloated. Wan, if you want to know, you can go to Princess Haeyong and tell her about it. Anyway, you don't have to worry about her doing anything. Although Princess Haeyong was special, Li Hongyuan really did not care much. Although she would not do anything, she would definitely be angry. She would only go to look for trouble if she had nothing better to do. However, the child should have been taken away at the beginning. Why haven't I heard anything about Princess Haeyong in the past few months? It stands to reason that Princess Haeyong should have asked the emperor for help in this case. Princess Haeyong naturally would not act rashly and alert the enemy when she does not know anything. After all, the child may lose his life if something goes wrong. Moreover, he is only a child. It is easy to hide. Also, it is unlikely that the person on the throne would mobilize a lot of people for her. The result may not be much better than Princess Haeyong looking for him herself. Today, Princess Haeyong appeared in front of so many people because she got the exact news. Because she caught Prince Rue in the act. Even if the emperor wanted to keep the peace, it was impossible. However, Princess Haeyong must know that she was schemed against. Will she think of you? Jingwan said the last sentence with a bit of ridicule. So what? Li Hongyuan did not take it seriously. Yes, so what? No matter how special Princess Haeyong was, she was a woman after all. Moreover, her glory days were over. Even if Princess Haeong knew it in the end, she could only be depressed and could not even shout it out. Chapter 529. Jingwon and Lee Hongyuan were still leisurely. However, Jingwon felt that her husband seemed to be a little strange recently. She once wondered if she had lost her attraction to him because someone had abstained from sex. Jingwon was not joking. From the beginning of their marriage, she had a deep understanding of someone's ability in a certain aspect. Outside of her simple life, he would not indulge in sex every night without restraint. The next time depended mainly on the length of the previous ceremony. It was possible for him to have sex for 2 consecutive nights, but it was relatively rare for him to have sex for 3 consecutive nights. The longest interval was 4 or 5 days. This kind of situation was more common in the Northwest. Because he was busy, he would not indulge himself every time. However, it was different this time. It had been more than 10 days. Was he very busy? Not at all. It could be said that because he had dealt with Lee Hongming, he had fewer things to do. However, it did not seem to be true that she was no longer attractive to him. When it was time to be clingy, he was clingy. When it was time to be intimate, he was still clingy. When it was time to be intimate, he was still clingy. Except for the lack of close physical contact, everything was normal. There was no little fairy. Jingwon felt strange in her heart. Then she paid a little attention. It was not that he did not have any desire for her. It was just that he did not overdo it every time. It was not even to the extent before their marriage. Sometimes when she saw his dark eyes, he wanted to swallow her alive. However, in the end he endured it. From this point of view there was no problem. Jingwon held her chin with one hand and tapped her face with her fingers. What was going on now? Jingwon's not very strong curiosity was aroused. Although a large part of it was because she was idle and the other party was her husband, so she could ask for confirmation unscrupulously. Therefore Jingwon began to court death. From time to time she would tease the living king of hell. She even took out the birthday gift she gave him last year again. The living king of hell was never Lu Xiaohui. He caught Jingwon and taught her a lesson. However, he still did not teach her a lesson. In the end he clasped Jingwon's waist, held her tightly in his arms and pinched her chin. Won, are you lonely? Jingwon's clothes were half undone. Her breath had not calmed down and the corners of her eyes were obviously red. Hearing this, she squinted at Lee Hongyuan. However, her current appearance was really not lethal. Instead, it made the man who had just vented his desire restless again. Lee Hongyuan kissed Jingwon's lips. Then he picked up Jingwon and prepared to take a bath. And it seemed that he was ready for a truce again. In this way, Jingwon was more and more confused about what this person was up to. However, because she could not get an answer, Jingwon became more and more courageous. She continued to court death in various ways, such as stewing soup for the living king of hell. Lee Hongyuan's evil desire was already strong enough. Sometimes he really wanted to directly strip people and give them a good spanking. However, Jingwon occasionally played tricks with a happy smile. Although Lee Hongyuan was in a bad mood, he was actually in a good mood. As for being repeatedly asked what he wanted to do, Lee Hongyuan was actually still hesitating about what he wanted to do. This was very rare for him, but he still persisted. Well, in fact, this kind of persistence was very uncomfortable. In the end, he chose to listen to the arrangement of fate this time. As for what he wanted, what he did not want, what he wanted and what he did not want, he did not have an answer to these questions. Because he had never thought about it properly. In his opinion, it was not necessary. Lee Hongyuan did not have much self-control in front of Jingwon. However, when he really wanted to do something, this man's self-control was absolutely strong. Therefore, every time Jingwon courted death and was beaten up badly, she still did not achieve her goal in the end. After playing enough, Jingwon also stopped. In any case, she would know what her husband wanted to do. It was just a matter of time. This was not the first time. Jingwon resumed her daily life of planting flowers, painting and raising pets. She was still as intimate with Lee Hongyuan as before, but she would no longer deliberately tease him. To Lee Hongyuan, this meant that he had lost a lot of interest. It must be known that being able to wait for his wife to take the initiative for once was not an easy thing to do. It was not easy for her to become a little vixen for once, and now she had become the Luo princess consort. Outside there were open struggles and veiled struggles, and Li Hongyuan had not left the gates of the Wangfu for a long time. Those people who still thought that Li Hongyuan was a good-for-nothing, naturally did not have any objections. After all, he was a big killing machine. For some people it was really good that he did not appear. However, for those who secretly served him it was a different matter. It was like a group of officials who were mentally and physically exhausted, but the one they served was an incapable monarch who indulged in pleasure and did not want to be too tired. Probably because they had been isolated from the outside world for too long, some people began to protest. It was not good for others to come to Jin Wangfu, but Jingwan's sister-in-law was completely fine. Sun Yijia came with some tactful greetings from the head of the Luo family. Sun Yijia was now pregnant. Because it was her second child, the situation of this child was also very good. Therefore she was not as cautious as the first child. Moreover, Sun Yijia was now more casual than ever. Those etiquette and rules that were embedded in her bones seemed to be dissipating little by little. At least she was no longer as rigid and orderly as a textbook. Jingwan saw that Sun Yijia was walking rather quickly and she seemed to be in a hurry. The servants behind her were all trembling in fear, as if they were afraid that Sun Yijia would fall if she wasn't careful. Okay, the roads of this Wangfu are flat and will not be slippery. How could I fall? Sun Yijia waved her hand at the person who was waiting on her and did not bother with the formalities. She directly sat down. The change that the living environment had on a person was indeed very big. The Sun Yijia that they first met, who would have thought that she would become like this today? However, it did not feel bad at all. Why did sister-in-law think of coming to the Wangfu? Jingwan pushed the drink that was specially prepared for Sun Yijia on the table. Sun Yijia was not polite and took a sip. The weather was hot. After being pregnant, the body temperature was naturally higher. Isn't it because you have been hiding in the Wangfu for too long? The people at home are all worried, so I came to take a look. Jingwan was speechless. It's just that the weather is getting hotter and we don't want to go out. What is there to be worried about? I am not worried, but grandfather and grandmother are. Sun Yijia looked at Jingwan and said, especially grandfather. Recently there have been a lot of things. In my eyes he is definitely a cultured person. Recently he seems to be a bit irritable. Alright, Jingwan understood. You guys should try to persuade grandfather not to work too hard. Until now there has been no news. It seems that he will not go to the summer palace in Qingda again this year. I will go back to take a look on the 6th of June. Sun Yijia nodded. Little sister Wan, what do you do all day long if you don't go out? Cultivate my body and mind. Jingwan took a sip of the special flower tea. Sun Yijia was slightly surprised. She suspected that Jingwan did not understand what she meant. Little sister Wan, are you sure? I am sure. Jingwan looked at her and smiled, taking care of the flowers and plants with the prince, painting some pictures, drinking tea, reading books, and occasionally playing a game of chess. I don't drink wine. Wake up early and go to bed early. I do morning exercises every day. These are not cultivating my body and mind. That's really rare. Wasn't it rare that the king of hell was so obedient? A certain someone was really unbelievably obedient recently. The 6th of June was Aunt's Day. Bringing back a married daughter should be an auspicious day to dispel disaster and resolve resentment. Since the 5th of May, it could be said that she had been holed up in the Wangfu for a full month. Although there was a custom for married daughters to return to their maternal home on the 6th of June, it was not always followed. For example, if Jin Qinhuang Fei returned to her maternal home, then the daughters-in-law of the Luo family would not return. But the other married daughters of the Luo family would definitely return. The frequency of Jingwan returning to her maternal home was not high, but among the Wang Fei she was definitely the most. And every time Jin Qinhuang would be there. Therefore the Luo family was very familiar with the matter of receiving Jin Qinhuang. They would do what they usually did. Receiving Jin Qinhuang was not a difficult matter. It was not much different from receiving other sons-in-law. On this point the king of hell was not the king of hell at all. He was too close to the people. The minister of personnel specially stayed at home. He needed to have a good chat with Jin Qinhuang. He was already so old. It was not good to continue being so irritable. Fortunately, this fatuous ruler also had times when he was not fatuous. With just a few words he appeased the minister of personnel. Obviously, because Sun Yijia brought back Jingwan's daily life, Old Madame Luo could not help but say a few words of concern. Jingwan was more specific. After all, old Madame Luo was an elder. She did not need to be as vague as Sun Yijia when she asked about her grandson-in-law. After old Madame Luo heard it, she did not seem to feel that there was anything wrong and put it aside. Obviously, Jingwan did not say the most important part. Calculating the time, it had been more than 20 days. However, Jingwan felt that it should be about time. What a certain person wanted to do, the answer would be revealed soon. In reality, it was just as Jingwan thought. On the 11th of June, when Jingwan wanted to tidy up and go to bed, she was bitten by her own husband. From head to toe, from inside to outside. For the entire month, Jingwan had already prepared herself to be paralyzed in bed for the whole day tomorrow. However, in reality, it was once again unexpected. A certain person was done in one time, although the time this time was a bit longer. Jingwan turned around. Because of the vigorous exercise, her body was drenched in sweat. She looked at a certain person with his eyes closed. Moreover, from the places where their bodies touched, she could tell that he was very energetic. Jingwan got closer. She reached out and put her hand on his shoulder, rubbing the tip of her nose against his. Yuan. After the passion, her voice was still a bit hoarse. Li Hongyuan opened his eyes. It was as if there was a ball of fire burning in his eyes. Wan, don't seduce me. How could Jingwan not feel his forbearance? Her slender jade-like hands stroked his body gently. Why are you enduring it? Li Hongyuan almost turned into a wolf, but at the last moment he restrained himself. Chapter 530. Because he did not know whether she was pregnant or not. After that, the living king of hell entered the period of abstinence. Jingwan knew the reason and definitely would not go to provoke him again. This desire had been bred, and if it was not resolved, it would inevitably be very uncomfortable. Although it was not that there was no solution, Jin Wang obviously did not like it too much. Li Hongyuan did not want to look for himself to suffer, so he also consciously restrained himself. As a result, between the two people, there was a very refreshing period of time. This pattern made the people who served them quite puzzled. For a time, they wondered if there was any problem between the two masters. But looking at their interactions during the day, it seemed that it was not the case. According to Gong Jio's medical skills, he would be able to feel the pregnancy pulse in about half a month. However, before that, Jingwan almost had a result. Because her body was good, her period had always been very accurate. It was a cycle of 30 days and there was basically no change. And this time it was almost the ovulation period, so the probability of pregnancy was actually quite high. Li Hongyuan hugged Jingwan, his palm covering Jingwan's lower abdomen, gently stroking it. His expression was slightly unpredictable. It's been 3 days. Maybe it really is that little bastard. Give him a little chance and he will come to this world. Regarding Jingwan's physical condition as a qualified husband, he naturally knew it like the back of his hand. Jingwan turned her head to the back and looked at his impeccable side profile. She reached out and touched his chin. It's only been 3 days. Since you and I have been married until now, has it ever been more than 3 days? Yuan, you have to know that a person's mood will actually affect the body. So, maybe it's because I have some expectations that it will affect the body's condition? In fact, in Jingwan's opinion, there was a high chance that she was pregnant. She was happy, nervous, and uncertain. This uncertainty naturally came from the man behind her. By the time the child was born, she would be 18 years old. Giving birth should not be a problem. Moreover, because it was the person she loved, even if she had to suffer, she was willing to give birth to a child for him. However, a certain someone did not tell her in advance. It was a little sudden. Half a month's time did not seem to be enough to mentally prepare her. After all, once the child was born, it was not enough to feed him. Well, since she was in the royal family, she probably did not need to worry about education. So after thinking about it, she was still uncertain about this man's attitude towards the child. Wan, are you looking forward to it? Li Hongyuan's hand paused, and his voice sounded a little uncertain. Because it's Yuan's. It's our collective crystallization, the continuation of our lives. That's why we're looking forward to it. I'll be fine. You'll also like our child, right? Jingwan rubbed his chin. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you, Wan. He probably would not like someone who surprised his wife in this life. Jingwan was helpless. In a feudal dynasty, this man's thoughts were probably unique. Then if it's really here, at least don't reject it and don't hate it, okay? Li Hongyuan did not comment and did not respond. Ask Gongjiu to take your pulse tomorrow. Okay. It was good to be able to confirm it earlier. Yuan, can you tell me about the child now? Li Hongyuan lowered his head and glanced at her. Then he said casually, there's nothing to say. But no matter what, it's your blood. Its temperament is quite similar to yours. It's also outstanding enough. That should be because your officials put in a lot of effort. Whether a person was outstanding or not, there were innate factors, but nurture was more important. Li Hongyuan suddenly fell silent. It felt a little gloomy. The speed at which he changed his expression was unparalleled. Jingwan didn't know what she had done to provoke him. What's wrong? That little bastard does have a lot of teachers. Do you know who his grand tutor is? From his expression, she knew that it was definitely someone who was in his minefield. It was either Qin Jingmin or Sun Yilin. And these two people, as long as there was no problem in a few years, their knowledge was enough to take on the heavy responsibility of grand tutor. However, the possibility of Sun Yilin should be higher, because from what she learned, Sheet had never interacted with Sun Yilin. No matter who it is, the most important credit is still Yuan. Jingwan turned around, hugged his waist and rubbed against him coquettishly. Li Hongyuan laughed mockingly but did not say anything. Jingwan's heart was wide open. This man was really sick at the slightest disagreement. Her heart was tired. However, Jingwan had a protective talisman now. Even if a certain someone didn't like the child, he would still care about her health. So, in the next 9 months she might be able to make a comeback and be the master of the family for once. She could ride roughshod over a certain someone. Jingwan touched her belly. In fact, she also liked the child in her belly. It was very unlikely that it was the one in her husband's previous life. Moreover, there was no way to verify it. It was quite a pity about this. The next day, Li Hongyuan directly sent someone to call Gongjiu. In fact, Gongjiu already had a guess about Jingwan's situation. Although she still had a straight face, she could not suppress her happiness. No matter what Li Hongyuan thought, in other people's eyes, a child was the foundation of a woman's life. This had never changed. With a child, their princess would be better. Gongjiu had always been in a good mood, but the moment his fingers touched Jingwan's wrist for a moment, his eyes flashed. Chapter 531. Jingwan gently hooked up the corners of her mouth, and the people around her were all overjoyed. If it wasn't for the rules, they probably would have jumped up. Because they didn't understand the specific situation, they didn't show it on the surface, but they were extremely anxious for their Wang Fei. Fortunately, during this period there was no one else around Li Hongyuan, so they could not show it, but their hearts were always hanging. Now at this moment their little hearts finally landed on the ground. Even if this child was a girl, it didn't matter. As long as it could be born according to the degree of love between Wang Ye and Wang Fei, a young Junju and a young Wang Ye would definitely be indispensable. Jingwan glanced at her own lord husband. There really wasn't the slightest bit of joy of becoming a father. Even Gongjiu, who was born as a shadow guard, had a trace of joy in his eyes, happy for master. Gongjiu's heart was actually relieved, because that contraceptive pill had always been concocted by him. Other people didn't know. Wang Ye didn't want an heir and he couldn't ask the reason. To some extent the pressure wasn't small and master hadn't taken medicine from him for a while. When Gongjiu realized it, he had a lot of expectations, but he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Gongjiu vaguely glanced at his master. Sure enough, on the matter of having a child, master wasn't the least bit enthusiastic. Others were worried to death, but he didn't care if he had an heir or not. That's right, the consensus of these people in Jin Wangfu was that the reason why their Wangfu didn't have a young master wasn't because of Wang Fei, but because of Wang Ye. Of course, it didn't refer to the body but the mentality. Men who married early, it wasn't that there weren't any fathers at the age of 14 or 15, but at the age of 25, if they still didn't have any children, it was estimated that the whole family would be in a hurry. Those who had the ability, they could carry a pile of concubines into the house. Those who didn't have the ability, the one who would suffer would probably be their wives. As the saying goes, there are 3 ways to be unfilial, but Jin Wangfu was essentially an unfilial son. While Jingwan was helpless, she was also quite happy. To be able to meet this kind of man who put his wife first and put his children aside, it was definitely the luckiest thing for a woman, especially in the current situation. However, Jingwan looked at Li Hongyuan. Although she didn't look happy, she didn't show any negative emotions. This was probably the best result. She couldn't ask for more. If there's anything they need to pay attention to, you can tell them clearly, no matter how big or small, Li Hongyuan said indifferently. Yes. Gong Jiu responded and then left respectfully. At this time, the servants also noticed Li Hongyuan's abnormality. And in the future, whether it was a boy or a girl, there was a high chance that they would snatch her from him. At least when the child was young and didn't know anything, his wife would most likely be on the child's side. The more he thought about it, the darker his face became. Was he looking for trouble for himself? Li Hongyuan also had a time when he did such a stupid thing. Li Hongyuan stroked Jingwan's belly a little harder. On the other hand, Jingwan did not feel anything. However, when she saw the expression on someone's face, Jingwan sighed in her heart. From this moment on, she was destined to not be a qualified mother. If she gave too much time to her child, then her child was destined to not be able to gain the love of his father. As a proud son of God, he might even lead a miserable life. Jingwan's hand covered Li Hongyuan's hand and lit 32 candles for the little thing that couldn't be any smaller. She silently apologized. In the future, she could only try her best to make time. After all, the child's father was going to be the emperor. When he was going to be the emperor, no matter how much work he did, he definitely had to make time every day to be busy with official business. Jingwan touched Li Hongyuan's cheek and smiled softly. The child is only a part of our life. But no matter what, in my heart at all times, you are the most important. Jingwan decided to smooth his hair first. Of course, her words were not mixed with any exaggeration. Li Hongyuan was probably really pleased and his face eased a little. Jingwan nestled in his arms again. Grandmother and the others have been looking forward to it. Should we tell them now or wait until the baby is stable? There was no doubt that although Jingwan had told grandmother and the others about the child, even if they understood, it didn't mean that they weren't worried at all. It's a little early now. There's no need to wait until the baby is stable. There's no reason for our child to have a problem. But let's wait for another half a month. At least it'll be clearer. Well, I'll listen to you. The couple was warm here, but the others were not so happy. On one hand they were happy, but on the other hand they were conflicted. Of course, there were also people like Gong Jiu and Gong Mama. They were purely happy because they were very clear about the importance of Wang Fei to Wang Ye. Worrying about Wang Fei was completely superfluous. Gong Mama had actually learned how to take care of pregnant women, but what she learned before was only theoretical knowledge. There was no real practice, so she had to understand as much as possible. Naturally, she would not let Gong Jiu go. It was true that Gong Jiu's medical skills were good, but in the field of gynecology he was still not as good as those who specialized in it. But now, for Wang Fei and the little master, he would definitely study it carefully. Chapter 532. However, although Bai Xiao was busy, she did not wander around in front of Jingwan. Because she knew that if her Wang Fei saw her, she would definitely be ordered to go back and nurture the fetus. Bai Xiao and Hei Mei had followed their father through the mountains and forests since childhood. Later on, their family changed and the journey was hard. Later on, she was brought back by Li Hongyuan to be nurtured. It was only when she reached Jingwan's side that she had a lot of free time. However, Bai Xiao's nature was one that could not stop. She worked herself into a life of toil. When she was bored, she did not feel bored. Even when she was pregnant, it was still the same. However, her condition had always been good. It was probably because of this that bodyguard Qian did not complain to Jingwan. Jingwan entered the nurturing mode. In fact, it started from that night when she was completely unsure whether she would be pregnant or not. The most obvious point was that Jingwan stopped her morning exercise from that day until the next morning. Now that she was sure that she was pregnant, it was impossible for her to have any large movements. Other than that, Jingwan's daily life did not change. However, in the past, Li Hongyuan did not allow Jingwan to have intimate contact with those furry little fellows. Now she could not even see them. They were all ordered by Li Hongyuan to be sent to the farmstead. Last year, Li Hongyuan's farmstead opened. In the summer, It became a place for many people to escape the heat and find fun. This year was still open. Following their return, the horse track had long reopened its doors and organized races. It was still popular. After they went to the Northwest last year in order to avoid trouble, the horse track was closed. It was not that no one tried to find another place to race horses, but in the end it was far from being effective. The other members of the imperial family either did not have enough weight or did not have the courage to take the lead. After tasting the wonderful taste of a large-scale race, that kind of small-scale race was naturally lacking in interest. The original layout of Jinqinhuang Fu meant that there were relatively few houses. Because there were many flowers and trees, the temperature was relatively low compared to other manors. Moreover, in specific locations, there were flowers and trees that repelled mosquitoes and insects. The fragrance would not affect people. Even if one did not go to the country estate, staying in Jinqinhuang Fu was still relatively comfortable. However, after a while, Jingwan began to feel helpless again. It was all because a certain someone was too strict with her. She was completely like a fragile object. She couldn't touch the lower plants or bend her waist. She couldn't reach out her hand or stretch her waist for the higher plants. Moreover, there were many plants that she couldn't get close to because she was worried that the fragrance would affect her body. Forget about that. When she was painting, she couldn't exceed 15 minutes. In the first 3 months, the main activity was walking. Because of her good physique, Jingwan set a time of 2 hours, which was divided into several periods. Every time there would be people around her. Those who didn't know would only think that Jin Qinhuang cared a lot about this piece of meat in his belly. Well, in reality he cared about her. At this point, Jingwan was still in a good mood and didn't show any strange temper. At most, she would occasionally pull on a certain someone's face to vent her inner depression. A certain someone was completely tolerant and pampered her. Jingwan's current state, other than the fact that she probably hadn't reached the stage where her body would show various symptoms, the fact that Li Hongyuan accompanied her almost all day should also be a large factor. In this way, more than half a month passed. Li Hongyuan directly had people invite the imperial physician. In fact, it was through the imperial physician that he conveyed this message to a certain person. The imperial physician who took Jingwan's pulse popped out these good words as if they didn't cost money. After all, in the imperial physician's view, Jin Qinhuang's marriage was difficult a few years ago and he finally married a Wang Fei. After a long time she wasn't pregnant, so his heart must be unhappy. Now that Jin Qinhuang's Wang Fei was finally pregnant, Jin Qinhuang didn't know how happy he would be. And as the person who diagnosed the slippery pulse, how could this reward be small? However, when he belatedly realized that Jin Qinhuang wasn't that excited, he was a few beats slower to remember that Jin Qinhuang Fu had a Fu doctor with excellent medical skills. How could he not know? The initial excitement must have already passed. Then he thought that he could obviously go to the emperor to ask for a reward. The emperor was looking forward to Jin Qinhuang's heir, similarly looking forward to the stars and the moon. However, Jin Qinhuang Fu was rich and overbearing and still gave the imperial physician a large reward. The imperial physician was a high-risk profession, but encountering this kind of good thing was also the envy of many people. Thus, the news of Jin Qinhuang's Wang Fei's pregnancy was like a spring caressing the earth. In a very short period of time, the common people of the capital knew. If it was said that they didn't pay attention before, then at this time, they discovered that they seemed to be looking forward to Jin Qinhuang's child. Not to mention other things just based on Jin Qinhuang's appearance if the child took after him, not to mention a boy if it was a girl who knew how beautiful it would be. Of course, this was only the thought of those who had seen Jin Qinhuang. After the imperial physician's diagnosis, Jin Qinhuang Fu had already sent someone to Luo Jia to report. Although Luo Jia had always been looking forward to Jingwan's stomach having good news, when they received the good news, they were still quite surprised. However, after that moment, almost everyone was beaming with joy, especially old Madame Luo. Originally, at her age, it was rare for her to show her emotions on her face, but now the smile on her face couldn't be suppressed. Without needing old Madame Luo's order, the mama beside her quickly went to prepare things. It seemed that old Madame would definitely make a trip herself. At this time, old Madame Luo basically couldn't sit still. She paced back and forth in the room, occasionally giving orders to prepare something. The womenfolk of the other branches all rushed over as soon as they received the news. After seeing old Madame Luo's state, They looked at each other and once again recognized Jingwan's position in old Madam's heart. It should be known that when Luo Jia's granddaughters-in-law were pregnant, whether it was the first child or the second child, or whether it was the first child of the fourth generation, old Madam was always calm and collected. There was joy, but it was far from being like this. These daughters-in-law of Luo Jia had a good mentality and were not jealous. Seeing that old Madame Luo acted as if she didn't see them and ordered people to prepare something, Sun Yijia smiled and stepped forward. "Grandmother, what doesn't Jin Qin Wang Fu have? It's enough to prepare a set of necessary things. We should go to the Wang Fu early to see Wang Fei. Wang Fei is the first child and there are no elders in the Wang Fu. Maybe Wang Fei is nervous and uneasy." Right. Old Madame Luo patted her forehead. "Jingguo's daughter-in-law is right. I was so happy that I became muddle-headed." Thus, not long after, under old Madame Luo's lead, the Luo family took several carriages to Jin Qin Wang Fu. At this time there was no need to avoid taboo. At this time, if there were still people who made irresponsible remarks or suspected something, then it really couldn't be justified. Under the situation where the Wang Fu was not doing anything, it was the first time that so many womenfolk of the Luo family went to the Wang Fu's door. When they saw Jingwan, Li Hongyuan was also there. After they greeted each other, Li Hongyuan and old Madame Luo chatted for a bit and then left. In the end, he was a grown man. How could he stay here for so long? Then Jingwan was about to get up when old Madame Luo hurriedly stepped forward. "What are you getting up for? Quickly sit down." Looking at her grandmother, who also treated her as a fragile object, Jingwan sat down obediently. Otherwise, who knew what grandmother would nag her about? It must be known that these days, a certain man also had a black face because of some of her unintentional actions. He was almost becoming a black-face god. Jingwan naturally learned to be obedient. When it came to her husband and grandmother, at certain times, grandmother's lethality would definitely rise in a straight line. Things that could be muddled through by acting spoiled in front of her husband, grandmother would slap you back. Old Madame Luo sat next to Jingwan and carefully looked at her. Seeing that there was no difference from before, she was relieved. Then she asked about Jingwan's situation in detail, from her physical condition to her diet, and even asked about Li Hongyuan's attitude and so on. Jingwan was very patient about the first part, but for the last part, Jingwan could only tell her grandmother about it. The problem was that there were so many people now. Jingwan's skin had become thicker now, but she still felt awkward. "Grandmother, everyone knows how His Highness treats Her Highness. Now that Her Highness is pregnant with His Highness's child, His Highness will be very happy. He will definitely treat Her Highness even better." Sun Yijia smiled as she arranged the flowers. At the same time, she winked at Jingwan when no one else could see. The bad thing about having elders around was that they couldn't speak as they pleased. So-called best friends meant that they could share everything that they couldn't say to their elders and husbands, regardless of whether it was good or bad. Jingwan also smiled back at Sun Yijia. Old Madame Luo also realized that her words were indeed a little inappropriate. "I'm so confused. Grandmother, you were just too happy." After that, the topic became more casual and no longer revolved around Jingwan. However, because there were no young girls, they talked about parenting. From grandmother old Madame Luo to eldest Aunt Wang, to sister-in-law Sun Yijia, they all had their own ideas. Of course, there were also those who had no right to speak, such as third Aunt Lu. After all, it was indeed inappropriate for her to say anything about raising a daughter like Luo Jingying. She could only listen quietly at the side. However, when she thought of Luo Jingying, Mrs. Lu's expression became more or less gloomy. She was pregnant 3 years ago, but in the end she ended up like that. Now she was a little better than before, but she was only 17 years old and she didn't have much vitality. It was as if she had one foot in the grave. She didn't know what would happen if she continued like this. There was a meal in the prince's mansion, and the Luo family didn't go back until most of them had left. Under normal circumstances, the maternal family would send the pregnant daughter away at this time. They would send experienced nannies and perhaps young and beautiful maids. It went without saying what they were for. However, when it came to Jingwan's matter, Mrs. Zhang could only stand aside. Everything was decided by old Madame Luo. However, old Madame Luo didn't seem to have thought of this and didn't mention it at all. After returning to the Luo family, Mrs. Zhang struggled for a while and finally decided to talk to her mother-in-law. "What are you doing here? After half a day of settling down, old Madame Luo had returned to normal. "Mother, I saw that Wan Wan's maids are all dressed up as young girls. We all know Wan Wan's character. Before she got married she didn't like concubines. But now that Wan Wan is pregnant, how can she serve His Highness? If Wan Wan is stubborn and refuses to give face to her maids, won't she be hostile to His Highness? So what do you want to do?" Old Madame Luo said coldly. Mrs. Zhang noticed that something was wrong with old Madame Luo, but she didn't know the details, so she could only bite the bullet. "Should we send 1 or 2 people directly to Wan Wan? Then wait for your daughter to hate you for the rest of her life." Old Madame Luo was angry. This daughter-in-law still didn't make any progress. "Just take care of your husband. Don't worry about anything else." Mrs. Zhang felt wronged. She knew that her daughter didn't like it, but she couldn't be estranged from her husband just because she didn't like it. The husband and wife had to spend the rest of their lives together. Was Mrs. Zhang's idea wrong? In fact, it was not wrong. 9 out of 10 mothers had the same idea. From this point of view, old Madame Luo still understood her. However, the more it was like this, the more it could only prove that Mrs. Zhang wasn't close to her daughter. Because they weren't close, she didn't know anything about the situation. Under normal circumstances, after the husband promised to be together for the rest of his life, wouldn't the first person he shared with after returning to the maternal family be his own mother? However, Mrs. Zhang didn't know anything about Jingwan, so she came up with a bad idea at this time. Jingwan and Mrs. Zhang weren't close, and old Madame Luo never thought that it was Jingwan's fault. "Okay, go back and do what you need to do. Don't think too much. Just wait for your grandson or granddaughter in the future," old Madame Luo said and looked at her a few more times. "Don't make decisions and do stupid things." Mrs. Zhang felt even more wronged. She really didn't think of making decisions. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come to old Madame Luo. "Why are you still here? Are you waiting for me to ask you to stay for dinner?" "Daughter-in-law will take her leave." Mrs. Zhang had to leave. It had to be said that old Madame Luo's attitude towards her was not good. If it didn't involve anything, it would be peaceful. But if it did, Mrs. Zhang would be scolded. Mrs. Zhang was used to it and didn't get angry with old Madame Luo. However, she was still worried about Jingwan. She was afraid that she would be too stubborn and have a conflict with Li Hongyuan. The other party was a prince. If there was a conflict, the family couldn't support her. At night, she went to find her husband, Luo Rongyan. Chapter 533. In such a large Wangfu, there would certainly be a lot of people, especially Jin Qinhuang, who was somewhat picky. If there were fewer people, they would certainly not be able to meet his requirements. The best job was of course to serve the 2 masters in the main courtyard. However, those who could enter the main courtyard would certainly be the minority of the minority. They would be carefully selected and exceptionally strict. Even if Jingwan's several head maidservants were married, they would have long been supplemented. It would not be easy for others to get their turn. When Jin Qinhuang wandered around the courtyard, he was basically accompanying Wang Fei. At other times, even his shadow could not be seen. How could they meet and hook up? The road to the main courtyard was also blocked. Therefore, even if some people had some ideas, they did not have the conditions to implement them. But the situation now was not the same. Wang Fei was pregnant and could not serve Wang Yao. Moreover, according to Wang Fei's temperament, the possibility of her opening the faces of the people around her was very small. Otherwise, she would have opened the faces long ago. Then their opportunity would come. You say there were many young ladies of noble families outside. However, other than Wang Fei, their Wang Ye had to be restrained by the title of Wang Fei. Thus, the range of choices was very small. And could the young ladies of ordinary families compare to the delicate skin and tender flesh of their Wangfu's maidservants? Thus, rather than looking outside, it would be better to choose from within the fu. Thinking so beautifully, it seemed that she had also thought of all aspects. It seemed that she did not think that Jin Qinhuang would abstain from sexual intercourse. Therefore, after learning that Jingwan was pregnant, in just a short span of 1 or 2 days, the entire Jin Qinhuang fu became somewhat unstable. It seemed that suddenly there were many young and beautiful maidservants in the Wang fu. Originally, it was a hot summer day. Wearing thin clothes, that figure was more and more reflected. Exquisite and exquisite, stepping on the bottom line to dress themselves up. It was truly a gorgeous display of flowers. allowing many people to feast their eyes. As usual, Jingwan was taking a stroll around the prince's mansion. When she saw this scene, her first reaction was, did the prince's mansion pick people from the farmstead? The servants in the prince's mansion were either from the farmstead or from the imperial household. Princess Consort, he didn't. Granny Gong said coldly. It was said that a pregnant woman would be dumb for 3 years, but Jingwan's IQ was still online. She just didn't react before. After all, she was too free and unfettered with her own husband. There were no mistresses, so she almost forgot about the existence of these creatures. Thus, she forgot about the duties that a virtuous and virtuous Wang Fei should fulfill. She forgot, but many people would not forget. The most obvious one was Lu Qingdi, even though Jingwan still didn't know that Lu Qingdi had sent 2 palace maids as gifts. Those 2 palace maids that made the living king of hell unhappy had already been dealt with. So what if Lu Qingdi sent them over, the living king of hell still didn't give face? And in Jinqin Wangfu it was only a few people who died. Even if it was brought to Lu Qingdi, it was of no use. Did the living king of hell still need a reason to kill people? And the others would remind her in various ways. Jingwan understood in a flash. It was just that as a wife, being pregnant was already hard. She had to take the initiative to arrange someone to warm her husband's bed, so as to not let her husband feel wronged. She couldn't be angry, she couldn't be jealous, otherwise she would be unvirtuous. Nonsense, what the hell were these things? Pregnant people, because of endocrine imbalance, would have emotional changes. Their emotions might be uncontrollable and fluctuating. Jingwan seemed to be a little affected now, her eyes becoming a little gloomy. Granny, go gather all of them. Jingwan suddenly smiled. Granny Gong had served Jingwan for several years and was naturally clear about the changes in her emotions. Thus, at this moment she clearly felt that there was something wrong with Jingwan. But so what? It was normal for pregnant people to have strange changes. In any case, even if Wang Ye didn't order, they would completely obey Princess Consort. Yes. Thus, in the entire Prince Yu's mansion, all the unmarried women over the age of 13 were gathered. Even the inferior maids were no exception. These people were a little confused at first, but when they saw Princess Consort sitting in the pavilion, some of them seemed to spontaneously understand the whole story, and they couldn't help but be excited. However, at the same time, those smart people seemed to be a little uncertain about how to appear in front of Princess Consort while they were excited. From Wang Ye's point of view, he should like Princess Consort the most. Otherwise, why would he favor Princess Consort the most? But now they were facing Princess Consort. No woman would like someone who looked like her. Based on the current situation, if they wanted to stand in front of Wang Ye, they had to go through Princess Consort first. Thus, imitating Princess Consort wouldn't work. Women were born jealous and didn't like women who were prettier than them. So, it was impossible to be prettier than Princess Consort. Princess Consort had always been dignified and elegant, so it was impossible to be enchanting and charming. Wang Ye didn't like those who passed Princess Consort. Or, well, they didn't have time to think about it, let alone change their makeup. In the past, she didn't pay attention to it. The New Year's reward added up. Compared to ordinary families, it's unknown how much better it is. To say, climbing into the bed to be able to get a status to become half a master, it's still reasonable. But here in Jin Wangfu, it's clear that there is no status, being slept with for nothing. At most they can get a bit of money. Wang Fei, without status, can still hope to have an heir. If you are pregnant, the mother will rely on the child's status. Even if there is no status, a child with Wang Ye's bloodline can pull up a large family. Even if their status is still a lowly one in many people's eyes, they are actually masters. Just like the saying, in front of the Prime Minister's door, there is a 7th-rank official, more or less the same principle. When Jingwan heard this, she smiled, but there was no trace of a smile in her eyes. These people, Jingwan hadn't finished speaking when she saw a servant girl kneel down in front of her. Wang Fei, these servants know their wrongs, begging you to have mercy. This son is so vicious, if it continues, I'm afraid. Wang Fei, begging you to have mercy. As she spoke, she kowtowed with a peng 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 sound, her forehead showing signs of blood. Jingwan raised an eyebrow. She was kowtowing, then kowtowed. Why did she deliberately lower her collar and stretch out her neck? Also, that appearance that looked like she was about to faint, but still persisted, stubborn and weak. Her forehead and neck formed a sharp contrast. There really was a kind of tyrannical beauty. Wangfei Wangye is here. The servant girl who served close to her reminded. Jingwan looked over. Sure enough, that peerlessly handsome man strode over. She was wondering how could someone suddenly put on such a show. This was to paint her in the eyes in front of a certain person. Jingwan's heart was a little angry at this moment. She didn't want to get up at all. Li Hongyuan directly walked over and sat beside her. He didn't know Jingwan completely, but he had at least 80 to 90%. Moreover, Jingwan didn't even try to hide it. Although she was smiling, it was a fake smile. How could Li Hongyuan not know that she wasn't very happy in her heart right now? He held her hand. It's already past time. Why haven't you gone back? It's hot outside. Wangye, have you finished the matters at hand? It's already finished. That's good. Look, these people all admire Wangye and want to be Wangye's bed-warming maidservants. Aren't I pregnant? They say it's to solve my problems. Outsiders definitely don't know what Wangye likes better than you. If you see someone you like, just take her back. Even if you can't give her a status, I can make the decision to set up a few tables for her. It was Li Hongyuan's first time seeing Jingwan's eccentric appearance. His eyes slid around her belly. Was it because she was pregnant that her temper became strange? Eunuch Mu walked to the maid who slandered Jingwan, squatted down and reached out to clasp the back of her neck. Bitch, how dare you slander the princess and try to climb up the social ladder? Eunuch, I didn't. I really didn't. Her begging for mercy turned into a scream in an instant. Eunuch Mu suddenly pressed her head and smashed it hard on the ground. The bang was much louder than that of the maid kowtowing just now. This is kowtowing and admitting your mistake. Do you understand? Eunuch Mu grabbed her hair and smashed her on the ground again and again. Soon there was a pool of blood on the ground. Eunuch Mu pushed her away and let her lie on the ground. Obviously she had fainted. It seemed that she might not die. After all, the princess had said not to kill anyone. However, it was hard to say whether she would become a fool or not. Eunuch Mu stood up and slowly wiped his hands with a handkerchief. Send all of them to the villages and other places. https://11/807/1437919. That you're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.